Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second lecture for Chapter 15. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the West African civilizations. In particular, we're going to look at three main ones. We're going to look at the Kingdom of Ghana, the Mali Empire, and the Songhai Empire. Three very, very influential empires from the history of the world that most people don't know about, and they've left their impact to this day. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to start with Ghana. Ghana is going to come to power and establish a very strong kingdom in West Africa through trade. And what they're going to do is they're going to tax trade caravans. There's going to be many trade caravans that are going to move across the Sahara Desert north to the Mediterranean coast of North Africa, and through there's going to be trade that's going to move across the Mediterranean Sea to Africa, or from Africa to Europe, and so forth. And they're going to be at this hub of moving goods from kind of southern West Africa and Central Africa, and be kind of the middleman there in moving goods in both directions. Now, the trade is typically going to be over two main trade goods here, and you need to remember these two. If you ever get lost, you're like, what are they talking about? What's a big key point to bring up with any of these three empires that we're going to talk about today? Remember, gold and salt are going to be very, very important for all three. People wanted gold, and Ghana needed salt. Okay, so it's going to help with this circular trade. And the reason why these two are important is because gold, obviously, we love it, it's shiny, it shows value. Salt, you need it for any number of things. We need it to survive, and it helps with preservation and so forth. So something that everybody needs. So by the 800s, Ghana's kings are ruling through these taxes and gifts. So other states that are near them, as well as trading states that they trade with, are giving them gifts. Now, and what they end up doing is Ghana, they have huge amounts of gold, and they end up limiting the supply of gold to help keep prices up. And think about this. If you guys think about when you have a limited supply of some kind of good, okay, and the demand for that's high, you can drive the prices up and kind of set them in your own way, and that helps bring even more money into Ghana because they can dictate what they're actually selling gold for or trading gold for. So it's a very, very key point. You need to remember that for those of you that are moving on to take economics, if you haven't done so, because supply and demand is the key feature here for why Ghana is able to prosper. All right, so the Islamic influence is very important. We talked about in the last section the spread of Islam across mainly northern Africa in the last half of that lecture, as well as remember we talked about some of this stuff back in chapter 10 and 11. But as Islam spreads across North Africa, typically through conquest, into sub-Saharan Africa, Islam's going to spread through trade. And typically it's going to be introduced by one means, through merchants. So as these merchants are coming in and trading with various places like Ghana, or as we move forward, Mali or Songhai, or other places in Africa, they're going to bring Islam with them. And you see kings of various places, and in this case Ghana, since we're talking about them, they actually have Muslim advisors that become close to them over the years. So that is going to allow them to kind of see Islam firsthand, and they start to adopt that. But again, one of the other reasons why it's adopted is that key point that we've talked about previously. It helps them maintain their beliefs. They can still keep their own beliefs and traditions within this new faith. So a lot of African cultures, they believe in what we call animism, belief in like a lot of gods are focused in nature and so forth, similar to kind of similar but different to Native American, the Native American religions, and so forth. So there's that. Now, one issue though is when the Almoravids, who we talked about in the last section, an Islamic group from Morocco, come down and actually take over Ghana for a period of time. This is actually very detrimental to Ghana, not only that they're under conquest of another group, but it disrupts the trade, and the amount of money and goods that are coming into that area taper off quite significantly because they're under control of a foreign power. Now, so this pretty much ends Ghana. We're going to move on and talk about our second empire here, our second group, and it's Mali. Now, Mali is going to begin as a kingdom initially of a surrounded by a group of people that speak a similar language called Mande. Now, their wealth is going to be centered on the same thing as Ghana. It's going to be on gold. The only difference here is they're going to shift a little bit. There's going to be new sources of gold. They're going to shift the trade routes to be in a little bit of a different area. Now, the first great leader of Mali is Sundiata. I'll provide a reading for him for you guys in this course to kind of learn a little bit more about him. But he conquers Ghana. So Ghana is going to be conquered for a second time and going to be kind of, they're going to be brought in or annexed into this empire. So essentially, as Mali expands from a kingdom to an empire, they do so at the expense of Ghana. All right. Now, throughout Mali's borders, there's going to be peace and prosperity. One of the reasons why not only Ghana being weakened previously that they even accept this further is you have very similar cultural traits, but peace and prosperity is going to help them accept that. Money is going to be a huge thing that's going to allow Mali to not only expand, but the people they come in contact with to accept their rule, because if you have money coming in, that's a huge thing to say, look, my life's better, as well as obviously keeping cultural traits and traditions in place. They established a very effective and sophisticated form of government in the Mali Empire, something that is actually more sophisticated at this time than what you're seeing in Western Europe. And this is a kind of a misnomer that most people don't know about in history. These states are more advanced than a lot of European groups at this time. So keep that in mind. All right. So now we can't talk about Mali without talking about Mansa Musa, perhaps the most famous African ruler of all time, of any state. It's arguable, but also perhaps the richest person in human history. We'll get into that here just in a second. So he brought stability to Mali after the death of Sundiata. When Sundiata died, he was their first great leader. Just like really in any societies we've talked about, when they lose a great leader, there's instability afterwards. So there's a kind of a brief period of instability, and then Mansa Musa takes control and reestablishes stability there. And the reason why is because he's a very skilled military leader. He's able to retake control of the gold salt trade that is so important for this region. He furthermore, he with other people working with him kind of divide the empire into provinces. Think of it terms here in the United States, we have states that help kind of organize the rule for our federal government. Same thing here within the empire for Mali. He's also a very devout Muslim, and this is a Muslim state, so he furthers the religion here, not just in the empire itself, but from being a devout Muslim himself, he takes a Hajj to Mecca. And the reason why this is important is because when he decides to take this Hajj to Mecca, as we're going to see in a little video we'll watch with this as well from a TED Talk, is that he wanted to show off the power of the Mali Empire. And as he makes his way across North Africa to Egypt, he stops there, he's giving gold and gifts and other things along the way. He actually brings so much stuff that in the example in Cairo, he devalues the currency there because of how much he gives away in gifts, just the amount of gold that he has with him. But what he ends up doing is his travels to Mecca and on the way back, as well as the power that's been established before and after with the gold salt trade for Mali, is Timbuktu, the center city for the Mali Empire, becomes a major place for not only trade in politics and culture, but it becomes a learning center. He brings back all of this knowledge from the Muslim world to West Africa, to the Empire of Mali, and it becomes the city in all of Africa, really, for a period of time. And that is because of Mansa Musa's strength and power. Now, another important person that we're going to take a look at here, not just in this lecture, but in some primary sources and some reading, primary source activities and some further readings, is Ibn Battuta. Now, we know that he traveled in some form. Whether or not he actually did everything that he said he did is up for debate. and he was a traveling historian. He's a Muslim from Tangiers in North Africa, modern day Morocco, very devout Muslim. But he, over a period of rough, just under 30 years, explored the Islamic world. And when I mean explored the Islamic world, I mean the entire thing, not just Africa or in the case of Mali or North Africa and Egypt, but into the Middle East, into the east coast of Africa, all the way to India and China. So he is said to have traveled all these places and wrote about all these cultures. And we know a lot about kind of the time period of and the how a variety of different societies functioned and what was going on in terms of trade, culture, politics, economics because of his writings. So a very influential person to understand the history of the Muslim world at this time. And here I wanted to give you guys this picture from a magazine. That shows you the routes of the so-called routes of Ibn Battuta throughout the region, and it's also linked with the routes of Marco Polo and Songhai, who were also very important travelers of this day. Marco Polo being a Christian from Italy, Songhai being a Muslim from China. That we'll talk about both. We'll talk about both a little bit later. As well. And you can see, look at all those red routes. He is said to have went to all these places. And just to kind of give you an understanding of where Tangiers is, this is where Ibn Battuta is from. Timbuktu here is the center of the Mali Empire, which has been the main focus of this lecture so far. And then he traveled throughout all of these regions that were all Muslim as well, except for these areas which were Christian, but you had some contact there too. All right, so the third and final culture main culture we're going to take a look at here today is the Songhai. And the Songhai, they rise to power and become very powerful after their rise for the same reason we saw with Ghana and Mali. They controlled the trade routes, and in particular, gold and salt are being traded. Now, they're an Islamic empire. And their first really main significant leader here that builds the empire is Sunni Ali, and he is able to build this empire through conquest. The Songhai Empire has a very, very mobile, professionally trained army. Now, when they take control and become the dominant empire in this region, they're able to do so by taking the capital of Mali, which is Timbuktu. And with that means they have the strongest cultural center in the region because remember, Timbuktu is not only a huge trading place, but it is a significant learning center as well. Another important city that they're going to take is Jenne, and they're going to take this city through marriage. This is actually not uncommon throughout many different societies and different periods of history that they expand their control through not only this is a form of diplomacy, but is marriage. And Jenne is an important trading city on the Niger River, so that's very, very important. Now, another important ruler is Askia Muhammad. So when Sunni Ali dies, his son comes to power, and he's not necessarily the most effective ruler. He gets overthrown by Askia. Now, Askia is an important ruler for the Songhai Empire because he's an important or excellent administrator. He is able to set up a very organized system of government that runs very efficiently through tax systems, through bureaucracy, and kind of still using the same provincial systems that were developed by the Mali Empire that we talked about earlier, as well as introducing specialized officials to not only help with, like, let's say taxes in this case as a really example, but in other means as well. Now, the reason why the Songhai Empire is going to fall apart is they lack modern weapons. When certain Muslim invaders come from the north, from Morocco, invade with firearms, in particular cannon and so forth, they're easily defeated. They don't have that technology just yet. All right. Now, I told you we had three main groups to talk about. Here's some secondary ones that we're going to focus on just here to end up. The Yoruba are a West African group of people from Nigeria, and they were really a group of people that were centered on agriculture. You had different kingdoms here, the Ifo and the Oyo being the largest within this Yoruba group. Um, the kings were both religious and political leaders. Think back to kind of a comparison when we talked about the Byzantine Empire, where their emperor was both a political and religious figure. Same thing here within the Yoruba culture. Um, all these people that were part of the Yoruba said they were descendant from the first ruler of Ife, is a religious authority. Sorry about that, um, and so forth. And their cities were the centers of trade, and they're supported by farms, and that is what led to their not only their growth but the trade and artwork that was developed within these groups. All right, Benin is another group that you've probably seen some of this art that you're seeing on the side, but this is another important group that we need to talk about. And just like with Ghana, Mali, and so forth, we're seeing that these cultures, they're named, their names have stuck around for modern countries in Africa today. In the case Mali is where it is, the Ghana Empire is named, isn't where modern Ghana is today. Benin here is actually pretty close, but not completely in the area, but it is pretty close to where this culture was to the modern day group today. All right, so Benin began in the 1200s near the Niger Delta, and their rule was based on descent, just like in most cases, most kingdoms that we see in history. They become a major state by the 1400s, and it was because of a very powerful army, and because of geographically where they sat along the Niger River. So they're really going to go from the Niger River to modern day Lagos, which is an important stretch of area that's rich in many different things that not only allow for maintaining of an army, but for trade as well. They're a very artistic culture. A lot of significant African pieces of art that we actually have from this period come from Benin. As you see two pictures here on the screen, they work very well with brass and copper. And in the 1480s, Benin began trading with Portugal. And this is going to be kind of the beginnings of the slave trade, or beginning stages of the slave trade in terms of the goods that they're trading. And again, with them being a very powerful military state, Benin's going to be getting access to firearms and so forth. And that's going to be one of the areas where you open up the slave trade there. All right, and then our last one here today are the Hosa city-states. Now, Hosa is, these people are still in the area of Nigeria, so we're kind of in the same area here for the last three, Hosa, Benin, and the Yoruba. The Hosa city-states, think of them in terms of, kind of keep in mind, like, about the ancient Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta. Those areas all were brought together by a common language, but they ruled separately as separate city-states. Same thing here. You have society grouped together by common language system. You have local rulers controlling through from walled cities and then farmlands on the outside. Now, they very adept at using horses for their ability to move around and kind of make sure that they control these areas. The wealth is typically through two ways: farming the outside lands and trading with other Hosa city-states or people outside of the Hosa realm that they have cordial relationships with. Kano and Katsina were the two major trading outposts of this area within the Hosa. Now, there was a slave trade. Now, this slave trade is typically built on captives in battles and selling them to other city-states for goods or other slaves. It's not the same type of slave system that we're typical familiar with in terms of like the plantation system of slavery that develops in North America. All right, so that's all I got for you guys today. This is a really jam-packed, full lecture on many different states. Remember, when you're thinking about Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, they're Muslim states, all based on trade, particularly that of gold and silver. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at Southern and East Coast Africa. As for that, that's all I got for you today. Have a good one.